Hello. So I had said I would probably do my last 20 as either one video or two videos, or multiple videos. So we're going to find out as I go how much longer, how long this will take, and then I'll cut it by that. Sir Chunk was going to participate, and then we just didn't have time. So he's not here. You have to just learn about my opinion on these books. I'm sure, he can add some running commentary later if you really want that. Although he has his list, and a lot of my top 20 were on his top 50 at some point. So not all of them, obviously, but I think of the ones that he's read, a lot of them did make it. So Frankenstein, I don't know if that was on his list, but it should have been. I'm pretty sure it was, but so Frankenstein, obviously classic. What I love about Frankenstein, though, is that it's not really a sci-fi book. It's not really a horror novel. I mean, obviously, over time, it's evolved into some other thing that is not what the book is about. But really, it's just a book about taking accountability for your actions, the dangers of pride, how far science should push. It's kind of, got a lot of the themes of, like, Michael Crichton stuff. So in that way, it's sci-fi, because it's more of like fear of science in the future. And obviously this was written at the beginning of sort of the Industrial Revolution, and the Romantics were very concerned about man's relationship with nature and sort of the arrogant kind of push for progress at the cost of everything. And so you see a lot of that in here, but then you also see things about, like, at what point do we kind of overstep our bounds? Like, maybe there are certain things we should not be getting involved in, like creating life, beyond the natural means, obviously. And so, but then there's also commentary here about, what makes a parent, and like what childhood trauma can do to somebody. I mean, obviously kind of wrapped in a metaphor here, but there's a lot of really great themes. And then obviously there's commentary about social class and how we treat people who are different from us. So there's like some, racism and gender bias, and some of that kind of obviously wrapped in this sort of science fiction horror story. But there's like way deeper themes to this than, like what you see in the movie. The movie is just not even, I don't know, there's no similarity really, except a guy makes a creature. Like, that's it. The thing is, and I agree, a lot of people are like, Victor's super whiny. He is super whiny. But that's kind of, I feel like that's kind of the point. Like, he's a horrible person. And he's so arrogant and just so convinced that he's the only person who, because he is the only one who made life, he's the only one who gets to determine who deserves life. And it's really a commentary on, obviously, certain levels of arrogance and social structure. And Mary Shelley, based him a little bit on Byron, and she had some personal stuff against Byron. I do think that this book, like, is better if you also study the Romantics and this time period, because while historical context is always great, and pretty important in any book, I think, there's a lot of books you can read and still enjoy outside of their era. But I do think a lot of the themes of Frankenstein, I mean, while they're relevant today and they're definitely, universal themes, I do think some of the commentary there's more to it if you spend a lot of time, like, with this time period, know a lot about this time period. So, but I just think there's so much going on in this book. I mean, I could honestly just take any given page and probably talk about it for like 45 minutes. I mean, there's just my copy. I mean, I think this is Sir Chunk's copy, actually, and like, he's got a ton of notes. You can see there's like some notes. Mine is not even like readable anymore. Mine is like set up. There are so many highlights that most of the book is highlighted. Probably at least 90% of the book is highlighted. So I now have color-coded highlights, and then a key, so I know like what I'm referring to. So I have like different highlights for different themes. It's absurd. Like, honestly, And I have like 4 copies that look like that. I've read it so many times for school, and, you know, and I always get something more out of it when I read it. I read it in so many classes, and I just keep feeling like I'm getting something from it. But again, there are chunks that are just Victor literally like, I created life, oh my god, it's ugly, and then he just runs away and whines for like 100 pages, okay, not 100 pages, but like 30 pages. Then we get all this really insightful stuff with the creature, and then we have this like showdown between him and the creature, and then the creature is going on doing some other stuff, and then he gets like sick and tired and whines a lot more, and then his friend dies because he's Victor's a scumbag, and he gets his friend killed because of his like scumbaggery. And then he's like sad about it, and then he's exhausted, so he's like just like in a house being exhausted, and I'm like, oh my god, Victor, like you are just such a scumbag. But you know, that's what you get with arrogant people. So that's Frankenstein. If you haven't read it, I mean, honestly, at this point, you should probably have read it, so go read it. That's number 20 on my best of all time. Okay, so we are back with a book I don't have, and this is Less Than Zero by Bret Easton Ellis. I used to have this, and maybe it's somewhere in my house. Honestly, like, I just need, like, 2 weeks off from, like, my life to just organize this house, but whatever, it's never gonna happen. I've been, like, organizing since COVID, and then, like, I kept doing all these projects, and then leaving those half done, and thinking I would have all this time, and then it was like, oh, now I'm ready to go back to work, and then now things are just like left in the state of total disrepair. But anyway, Less Than Zero by Bret Easton Ellis. And if you've read Bret Easton Ellis, you probably know, like, it's going to be disturbing. There are going to be trigger warnings. It's going to probably be worse than anything you've ever read, in terms of like some of the stuff that happens. And that's the case here. But Less Than Zero to me, just, I mean, obviously there is one particular scene. I mean, there's a lot of scenes that are really messed up. There's one particular scene toward the end that's just horribly disturbing. But it works because it really just drives home the point of the book. And so the book is basically about this kid, guy. I mean, he's a kid though, that, you know, he's in his late teens. So it's his first winter break coming back from college. So he's from the LA, I think it's LA. He's from somewhere in California. I'm pretty sure it's the LA area. And he went to college in New England. And so he's kind of been away from all of his high school friends and the people he knew growing up. And he's starting to become like a different person, you know, and he's met these new people, and you know, they have like different values and different views, and you know, he's kind of like, I don't even know if I fit back in. And so he kind of gets back, and he's not really looking forward to seeing them, but he is, because you know, they are his friends from like, you know, growing up. And then he just gets kind of sucked back into the awfulness of this group of people, and they are all just like totally awful, hedonistic, like no goals, no ambition, just doing drugs and, you know, messing around, and basically like very much like your Lost Generation. I had compared this to The Great Gatsby, and Sir Chunk was like, no, it's not, you know, the people in Great Gatsby aren't as bad. And I'm like, well, you know, Tom was a Nazi. So like, I mean, but again, you know, we don't see this level of debauchery or awfulness in The Great Gatsby, but I do feel like it's similar in the themes of awful people who have money and power and just will destroy everything because they can. And I mean, and obviously that's Bret Easton Ellis' thing. Like, so if you have read American Psycho, if you've read, what's that other one he had? There was a movie with like the guy from Dawson's Creek, Rules of Attraction. So if you've read like those books, you know what you're getting in terms of like thematics. Like, Bret Easton Ellis has a lot to say about the 80s and the excess and how much money could, you know, buy. And so this one, I feel like, you know, where American Psycho is so over the top that it's like satirical more than it's, although part of it's because like the movie is satirical. So, you know, the book isn't as effective at it, but I mean, it's so over the top that you can't necessarily take it seriously. Less Than Zero is like a lot more, I feel like, authentic, honest about like just what you go through, like when you realize your friends are horrible people. And I mean, I'm fortunate that my best friend, you know, growing up, I still talk to her. She's great. But I mean, I've had those people in my life. We all have, you know, like that you hang on to and you think they're good people, and then like they just kind of reveal these things and you're like, you know, maybe they're horrible people, and what's wrong with me? Like, why did I not see this when I was for years? And so it's kind of a lot of that, but it's also that normal like coming of age where you realize like this isn't my life anymore. Once you've moved away or you've kind of gone off and like started to live your life. And so yes, there is this very, very disturbing scene, you know, content warning for sexual assault and I mean drugs, and she's underage. And I'm not like justifying it, but I like the guys are like in their late teens, early 20s, and she's like 12, which is like really messed up. Don't get me wrong, but like, so I think sometimes, you know, you hear 12 and you're thinking it's like some like 50-year-old man, and so, which is a whole different thing, you know. Not that it's okay, you know, at 19 either, but like they're all just kind of in the same friend group, and they are all just sort of lost. I mean, but that's the point, is, you know, she's 12, so she's already like kind of sucked into this, and I think that's kind of the harder part for me. Like, I mean, yeah, it's concerning that she's 12, but I was like more concerned just on like the terms of like the innocence, kind of like what that embodies, and then how like early she's just kind of, that's her track now. And it reminds me a lot, to be honest, it reminds me a lot of Catcher in the Rye. I mean, not plot wise, but just thematically, you know, where like realizing sort of how much the world corrupts people and how you can't really protect innocence. And so there's a lot of that thematic stuff as well. So anyway, Less Than Zero is amazing. I really love this book. I mean, it probably shouldn't be as good as it is for me, but I just really loved it and I really connected to it and thought, you know, like, I mean, obviously I'm not a guy going out, you know, doing drugs and trying to pick up girls at like bars and clubs and, you know, doing horrible things with them. But I do relate to that idea of like kind of separating all those pieces of yourself, and as you sort of age and realizing like things that you maybe kind of bought into or thought were what you wanted in your life, and how like you kind of grow out away from them and realize maybe they're toxic and bad. So anyway, so that's Less Than Zero. All right, back with my number 18 book, and I do not own this book, and this is on my Christmas list because I actually do want to get a copy of this. But this is Spear Cuts Through Water, by Simon Jimenez, I believe. And the thing with this book, I just read this book a few months ago. It's so good that it's on my top 20 of all time. Like, very few, I mean, I do have a decent amount of like more recent reads on here, just, you know, and that's one of those dangers of anytime you do a list, it's like, what are your moods at this moment in time? What have you been reading lately? You know, what random nostalgia piece is like hitting you hard today? But this book just blew me away. I've read nothing like it in my life. I loved it so much. I just could not even get over how good this book is. I'm not a big fantasy reader, and so it's fantasy, but it's like folklore, so it's not, I mean, it is fantasy, but it's different. What I'm realizing is I think I like fairy tales and folklore a little more generally than like traditional fantasy. Not always, but the ones I've really, really enjoyed, a lot of them have been like Nettle and Bones fairy tale. This is folklore, although I, you know, have a big fantasy one coming up, some fantasy stuff coming. But the thing with like Spear Cuts Through Water is everything about it shouldn't work. Like, when I started it, I was trying to explain it, and I was like, well, so it's in first, second, and third person. It's in 3 or 4 different timelines, all at the same time. It's about this like empire that like this evil emperor and his sons, and this, you know, trying to like this society basically trying to like live in this horrible world. But it's also about like a kid now, maybe, like dealing with like the aftermath of war in his country or community. But then there's also a play being put on, and he's like carried into this like night theater, like in his sleep maybe, but like it's not really clear. So I don't know. Like, I honestly, like, there's so much going on in this book, and every single page of it was just stunning. There are animal deaths. Like, in particular, there's like a really horrible death. What's weird about it is it's not necessarily that the death itself is really horrible. I did get upset, but like, you know, it's not a graphic death, but the character is someone that you have become so close to. And it works. I mean, it's necessary for the plot, and like it all works out, I guess, in a weird way. But there are some like really graphic violence and like just messed up things that go on. But overall, this book is gorgeous. The writing is beautiful. It's so emotional. Like it's just a great fantasy fairy tale adventure story, but there's so much going on that's like existential, and like, why are we here, and what does it mean to be human, and what is love, and what do we give up for love, and like there's all these themes that are just so beyond like what you would normally expect in a book like this. And I'm like, I don't even know where to start with this book, because the fantasy element's great and I'm loving the story, but then it's just blowing my mind page after page after page of just how incredibly like uncrafted it is, but also how meaningful this entire story is. And there is a romance element, which you know is not my thing, but it's really done well, like, because it's a very natural part of the story. I don't mind romance elements if they fit, you know, if they're not just like forced in so we could have a romance element. And this one is just a huge part of the story, but it's really crafted and like it's been woven in effectively. It is queer if that bothers you. It shouldn't, because, you know, it's 2023 and get over it, but it is a queer romance. But it's just, I love the characters. I love the setting. I love the writing. I cannot say enough about this book. And like, I can't even explain this book because there's just so much going on. It's absolutely gorgeous. I only know a few people who've read it, and they all are like absolutely in love with it because it's that good. I feel like I've seen a lot of like really strong 5-star reviews and then a lot of like DNF. So it might just not be for everybody. But honestly, this book, so this is The Spear Cuts Through Water. Go read it. It's gorgeous. I'd love to know what you thought if you've read it. So, all right, moving into some that we have. A couple that I have. So I have a couple that I have that I've read in the last year, or a year-ish. This one I'm pretty sure I read the beginning of this year, maybe at the end of last year. This is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. And what's funny about this book is when I read it, I liked it. And I was like, yeah, it's a pretty solid 4-star read, really enjoyed it. And I didn't think like it would be something I would love this much. And then the more I've thought about it, this is how it's like made its way up here, and it's become a 5-star read, and it's also made it into my top 20. Because on the surface, this is a fairly creative murder mystery, but it's not like, as a murder mystery, there are certain elements, there's a gimmick that's pretty creative, but you know, it's a traditional murder mystery. So basically, it's set on this British, I think it's British, I mean, I don't know if they really say, but basically British estate. I feel like it's sometime like in the past. There is a car, but I feel like it's like regular cars. I mean, there's other elements to it that make sense, but it feels like, you know, basically Downton Abbey kind of. So like Agatha Christie, you know, that time period. So there were cars, but like most people didn't have them. And, you know, turn of the century kind of time period, British estate, a lot of land. And so there's a group of people who are at this estate celebrating, I don't know if it's Evelyn's birthday or there's like a party for something, but essentially at the end of the party in this locked room, she is murdered. Well, she's outside, but there's a murder and she's killed. And so we start with like somebody out hunting. They're doing, you know, like the hunting in the woods, which people do apparently when they go to manor homes in Britain. And so we open with this one character, and it's kind of like in the middle of everything. And what we find out pretty quickly over the next couple chapters is that essentially this character gets sort of teleported at the end of each evening after Evelyn dies. He's then placed, or she is placed into one of the other people who's a suspect in this murder, and essentially has, I think, 7 or 8 days to solve this crime. And so because, like, at the end of each evening, the person is teleported into another person, like, we're getting all of the pieces of the murder mystery, but slowly through each version of, like, what's going on. So you're getting like all these different perspectives, and then he's also trying to solve a crime, and he's trying to like leave hints for the next person he might teleport into. And then it turns out there's other people that are also teleporting in between bodies who are trying to beat him, because the person who apparently solves the crime first gets out of this loop, and then everyone else just gets trapped or something. It's kind of weird. And so I think I saw somebody compared it to like Groundhog Day meets like, you know, an Agatha Christie novel. And that's basically what it is. However, so the murder mystery's great. And that's where like the 4-star came in. But then like toward the end, it has like some other elements that I don't want to spoil. And I think those at first I was like, I don't know how I feel about these, because I thought I was reading this murder mystery and then it's like doing something else. But then the more I've thought about it, the more I really love what is done with this story. And I just can't think of anything like it. Like, I don't get a lot of murder mysteries that are also emotionally impactful and kind of have a lot of like depth in terms of like, you know, themes of humanity. And so I really, really loved this book. And so I recommend it if you haven't read it. I'm curious if you have read it, what you thought of it. Really unique. But even like if you don't like that, like some of the other deeper elements, it doesn't read super like over the top literary, and you'll probably just enjoy it anyway, because I mean it's basically a locked room murder mystery, so who doesn't love that? All right, so moving into 16. This is technically a series, but I've only read the first 2, so I'm gonna say these first 2. So this is the Thursday Murder Club, which I think everybody's read at this point. The Thursday Murder Club, I've read 1 and 2. I do have 3, but I haven't read it, and obviously I want to get 4 for Christmas. I love this series. And, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if this is, like, an American thing, because it's very British. And I absolutely loved how British it felt. It's this old, like, group of old people in this retirement community in Britain, solving cold cases. And they're just very, to me, they're like probably a little like stereotypical. I'm sure British people are like, you know, we're not all like this. But like to me, they're like, you're just stereotype of like British old people. And like, I love it. I love the humor. It's like dry and kind of snarky and British. And I love everything about it. I mean, the murder is like, I'm not a big cozy murder person. And I guess technically this is cozy. I feel like it's not, because the murder's pretty, like, legit. And there's, like, a lot of actual violence going on. And to me, like, cozy is always, like, a cat solving, like, you know, who stole the, like, recipe for the bake sale or something. But I know that's not the definition of cozy. But, so, I mean, technically it's a cozy mystery. But to me, I feel like it was, like, a little more, like, hefty in terms of the murder. And I loved the murder mystery elements. And then the characters are so endearing. I just cannot wait. Like, I just haven't had time to get back to the 3rd one. And I'm kind of glad, because I think I'll probably want to read 3 and 4 if I get 4 for Christmas. Probably read them one after the other, so I can kind of... That's what I did with these 2. I just read them one after the other. And then the 3rd one hadn't come out, so I got it for Christmas. And then I haven't gotten back to it. So it might be good at this point to just wait and then read them together. Apparently Richard Osman's famous. And so there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I don't want to read his books because... celebrity authors, that's dumb. And I mean, I don't know who he is, so I don't know. I like the book. I've only read, I think, I have read books by famous people that I didn't know were famous. But I think the only celebrity author that I'm aware of that I knew was a celebrity, like when I read their book, was Ethan Hawke. And Ethan Hawke's writing is fantastic, and I've loved his books. I read like 3 of them, and I really want to read some of his newer stuff. But so I don't know. I don't know if it's ghostwritten. I don't know if that's why it's popular, because he's famous, but I think they're really fun, and so I don't care. All right, so I don't know where this next one is. I have it. I read it, and Sir Tonk read it, and I don't know what has become of my book. But the next one is Daisy Darker. And I know I kind of went over this in a previous review, and I think it was in July I read it. I love this book. I mean, for me, it's like literally everything I love, because it's kind of 2 books. One is a murder mystery, trapped on an island, getting killed off one by one, with a poem. I mean, you know, that's like my dream. I love books like that. I love when people get killed off one by one. And then it's also a story about, like, I don't want to say family, but also like teen, kind of like coming of age, and like this girl who just doesn't fit in with her family, and I love that. I love sad girls, and I love murder mysteries. And so you combine sad girls and murder mysteries, and I am pretty much happy. And this is everything I want in a book. And I loved it. It was absolutely fantastic. It blew me away. Just read it like a month ago, and it's number 15. I mean, it's that good. I guess some people were like, oh, I didn't see the twist coming, and I thought the twist was dumb, or I saw it coming. I saw the twist coming on like page 5. Like, I was pretty much like, yeah, I know what's going on here. I've been here. I've done this before. I've seen this, been around this road before. So I recognized it, and it actually was, I thought I was like happy knowing, because as I was reading, I was like, yep, confirming my theory here. And it just all kept building to that. And I thought it actually, because it did confirm my theory, I actually thought it did a really good job of doing it, because I was paying attention to it. And I was also like looking at like, are they dropping enough hints without being like super obvious? And so I really enjoyed it. I guess I've had a couple people say their one complaint is that it's so much like Agatha Christie and Then There Were None, that part of the murder mystery was almost obvious if you've read that book and you know that book really well. And I can see that argument. I didn't catch it. I had no idea who the murderer was. I was like making nonsense up that didn't make any sense. I had like people who like were mentioned one time on like page 3, like thinking they were the killer. So like, yeah, I didn't catch it. So I did catch the other big twist though. So Daisy Darker, I love it. I've already reviewed it, so I'm not going to talk much more about it. I think Sir Tonk's going to talk about it at the end of this month. He hated it, so yay. I bet you can tell what this is. You cannot. This is The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold, which you can't tell. I don't know why. I don't know what happens to my dust jackets. Sometimes I use them as bookmarks, and then they just like disappear into the ether. So The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. I love this book. I don't feel like this is going out on a limb. Like, people know about this book. It's been around forever. It's been, it's won a bunch of things. People love it. This is number 14. Lovely Bones, if you don't know, it's about a girl who is raped and murdered. It's like in the 70s. She's raped and murdered coming home from school. She's 14. And that's not a spoiler. She's raped and murdered in the first, 3 pages or whatever of the book. So the book is set. If you've seen this movie, throw it out, pretend it didn't happen. Never speak of it again. What happens in the book is this girl, Susie Salmon, she is in her heaven, but it's not like a religious heaven. It's just where she is after death. And her heaven's kind of cool, and she's meets somebody else, and there's kind of a cool heaven part of it too, which is really interesting. But a lot of it is her watching her family deal with the aftermath of her death. And so some of it is a murder mystery. I mean, we know who did it. She knows who did it. Her family trying to figure out who could have done it. The cops trying to figure it out. So there's a real there is a murder mystery element, but really what it's about is how it's about family, and it's about the relationships you have. and also how people deal with crime and like deal with trauma and tragedy. And so you get to see like her parents and how they kind of, their marriage starts to fall apart. And then, you know, like her sister who's little, and then like she has to grow up always being like the sister of the dead girl. And it's in a small town, so it's not like, you know, there's a lot of dead girls. So like she's that girl, the boy she had a crush on. It's a really interesting look. And I'm like a big fan of this because like this is kind of the style of writing I like, is like I write about like sad people, but I do often have like a crime element, but I'm like more interested in the other side of the crime. Like not necessarily, like I love reading about the crime and like solving the crime and the crime happening and people chasing killers, but for me, like I'm always really interested in the stories you don't get. Like everybody who's left trying to pick up the pieces after the crime. And so this was, I think, one of the first books I'd ever read that had done that. And I think a lot more books are doing it now. Or maybe this one kind of led me to that genre. But if you haven't read The Lovely Bones, you really should. It's beautiful. I still cry. Like if I still read the ending of this book, I will cry. So I'm not going to do that because if I read it right now, I'll start bawling my eyes out. And that would be embarrassing. All right, so the next one we have is number 13. It's a nice short one, and it's Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. I know, I mean, Steinbeck's good. You know, I haven't read East of Eden. That one's too long for me. I read Grapes of Wrath. It was fine. It was like, okay story with like, you know, chapters and chapters of like history of the Dust Bowl. So if you like that, great. I mean, Steinbeck's writing is really great, and I do love him. I hate The Pearl, and I know some people like it, but you know what? That book needs to get shot from a cannon. I hate it. Absolutely hate that book. Biggest waste of my time. I get the theme. Fine. It's fine to talk about the theme. I mean, it is only like 90 pages, so you can probably suck it up. But we had to read that in school, and it was like summer reading, and that is not good summer reading. It was like summer reading for like 8th grade. And like, I don't want to think about like the futility of life at like that age and in summer. Like, I don't know. So anyway, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about Of Mice and Men. So Of Mice and Men is an absolutely beautiful book. If you haven't read it, I mean, I don't know what there is to say. Like, everyone should kind of read this book. But if you haven't read it, it's about a guy who, two guys who basically it's during the Depression, and they are, you know, essentially traveling farmhands, you know, like just picking up work, migrant sort of workers. And they're not migrants, but you know, I guess they are in this kind of world. One of them is like kind of just, you know, I guess you're a regular guy, and one is like developmentally disabled, and he's slow, but he's a really good worker because he's big and he's strong, but he doesn't process things that effectively, and so it obviously causes problems. And so a lot of this is just a story. I mean, it's a beautiful story about friendship. It's a beautiful story about like, you know, trying to like find joy in like horrible times and like the small things in life that can give you, you know, peace and joy. But it's also a really strong commentary about like how much like the world sucks and like beats you down and essentially destroys everything that's good. And so like, you know, you can keep going, but eventually people will take take things from you. So, I mean, it's based on the, you know, and the title comes from the poem, you know, the best laid plans of mice and men gang off the glay. So, you know, like things don't work out. And so, I mean, if you know that, you pretty much like, it's very sad, but it's also very beautiful. And it's just, I mean, it's number 13 because it's one of the best books of all time. So it should be read. All right, and then going another classic, my number 12 is The Great Gatsby. And look, I mean, if you're not from the U.S., I can understand if maybe like you're like, I don't get it. This is the American novel, you know, like it's the American dream personified, well, and shown how like futile and worthless it all is. It's about horrible people. They're being horrible. They do horrible things. There's no consequences to their horribleness. And it's just about like how hard some people will struggle and like they never can get anywhere in life, and then other people can just get whatever they want, continue to like destroy everything and get what they want. So it's pretty much, you know, America. And I mean, I think like if you haven't read this, or if you haven't read it since high school, like now is the best time. We are like, in the world of like super over the top greed and, you know, capitalism, and like we're just as bad as it was, you know, leading into the Great Depression. I mean, the cost of living is obscene. You know, billionaires are just like, let's screw everybody over. So very similar. But what I also love about this book is it's like really strong themes of nostalgia, and how like, you know, that can destroy you essentially, and how you can go your whole life trying so hard for something, thinking you can like regain that moment in time. You know, like Nick says, we can't go back, and you know, we can't repeat the past, we can't relive the past. And Gatsby's like, but that's the whole point. Why do I have money? Why do I have all these things if I can't get the one thing I've ever wanted? And it's beautiful and heartbreaking and awesome and just gorgeous writing. I mean, there are times where like you just look at a page and you're just like, wow, like I just need a minute for this page. One of the most beautiful endings of all time. Lots of beautiful writing. Really heartbreaking story. I mean, I'm a big fan of miserable, so you may have picked up on that. So yeah, really, really sad book. All right, number 11. It was a very large book. It was very hard though. Number 11 is A Song of Ice and Fire, the whole series. Well, the parts that are done. But I have Storm of Swords here because that's my favorite in the series. I love Game of Thrones. Like, I have an unhealthy love of the show. Everything about it, amazing. Favorite show of all time. I have watched it a bunch of times. I go on like annual, just like, I'm going to rewatch all of it. Every season we would like, before it came out, we'd watch all the episodes leading up to that season. So that's a lot of times to watch it. And then now, like, I just randomly will be like, let's rewatch all 8 seasons or 9 seasons or whatever. I think it was 8. I love this series. I love the books. I love the show. I love everything about it, except the fact that it's not done. I do not love that. I've been very clear about. I know I've mentioned this many, many times. But if you have seen the show and you're curious about the books, they definitely should be read. Like, there's so many other things that are going on. I think by like Clash of Kings, you're already starting to see it, and definitely by Storm of Swords, it's like there's whole other sections that like you're not getting in the show. And also, you know, you should watch the show if you've read the books and you haven't watched the show, because that's probably the only ending we're ever going to get. So, also, well, I'm not going to give any spoilers in case you haven't watched the show. So that is my top 11 through 20. And I think I'm going to come back and do my top 10. All right. Bye.